My name's Maryam. I've been working for Mandala Theatre Company for just under a year now, actually. I do all the comms and marketing. Mandala Theatre is a company that focuses on social justice through theatre, so particularly using the methodology of artivism, which is blending art and activism. I don't necessarily come from a theatre background, so my background is in social justice, climate justice, and community organising, as well as education. And I kind of stumbled into art and, in particular, theatre. I think that stems from the idea of this culture around theatre and around art being very middle class, being very quote unquote bourgeoisie. And I come from a working class background, an immigrant family, and it was always something that was off the cards, off the table for me. So, yeah, that's a bit about me. I kind of think of it in a way of not seeing anti-racist work or anti-racist practices through the lens of DEI or EDI or whatever you prefer, or inclusion policies, but rather seeing anti-racism work as a framework, a practice to understand, especially in Oxford, the larger divide of towns versus gowns and the big divide that exists in wider Oxfordshire. So kind of putting it this way is the fact that a lot of the cultural work and cultural practitioners are located within the city centre of Oxford. For working class or marginalised people who are on the outskirts of Oxford, Oxfordshire. And then that in itself kind of perpetuates a systemic kind of segregation of who has access to culture and who doesn't. So I've always seen it as, rather than bringing people to us, how can we go to them? How can we go to these communities on a level playing field and say, what work would you like to see being done in Oxford or even Oxfordshire? What kind of cultural programming and things would you like to see? And how can we work with you to bring these spaces to your community and make them as accessible as possible? And kind of using Mandala Theatre as an example, we've done a lot of this through our work with Seed Guardians, which is a play about climate justice within the global south and the UK and how these kind of link together. We had our last show at Blackbird Leys, which is the 20th most deprived area in the UK, and it sits just outside of Oxford and the university. And it's kind of been very neglected by the council and the university, and kind of being cast away because it is a place where a lot of the marginalised and vulnerable people do live within Oxfordshire. And our response from the audience was, we want to see more within Blackbird Seas. We want to see more cultural programming. We want to see work that talks about us and our lives and our communities. And we want to work with you to have them, rather than creating a power of balance of, we will bring stuff to you. Our art should reflect the lives of people who are most vulnerable and most marginalised within society. I think it's an uncomfortable process to confront your own privilege and to confront that maybe your group, organisation, etc., is not accessible to everyone and is inaccessible to the most marginalised and racialised within society. And you kind of see it with how it represents within Oxford and how people do not want to confront that reality, and they often place a band-aid or a sticker over it in terms of, oh, we're programming XYZ culture, XYZ person or XYZ artist, therefore we've kind of ticked that off our list of things that we need to do. But I think in order for radical change to happen, we need to see where the cultural labour is kind of distributed within Oxford, who holds the highest positions within these different organisations, who has the most power to influence and make change. I think specific to Oxford, it is the university that holds a lot of that power. And then also a lot of these cultural organisations are often run by white men, which again is something that we need to interrogate and think about how accessible these spaces are for marginalised people. Like, for instance, I use my own example of the fact that this was always a space that I saw off the cards for me, and it's only because I kind of stumbled across it through Yasmin, who is also a woman of global majority, and I'm really lucky to work for an all-female global majority company. But again, that is a very, very rare fact, and the fact that Mandala Theatre does not have the clout or the upstanding that bigger theatre companies in Oxford do is also representative of who works at that company and who runs that company. So yeah, I guess my point is kind of interrogating where the labour in terms of cultural labour is distributed within Oxford and how we can change those dynamics and power imbalances. I think accessibility is key when it comes to these spaces. So from my experience, a lot of workshops or panels or things that young people are invited to are often expensive, so they can't afford the tickets, they can't afford the bus travel to go to these places, especially if they're within the city centre, and for instance they're in Blackbird Leys or outer Oxfordshire. They have no way of getting to these places. Or if they're invited to volunteer or stuff. Often young people are a big part of the household income, especially within working class communities or racialized communities. So these opportunities need to be paid so they can be able to afford to do these kind of things. They can't kind of do them for free. They don't have that luxury. So making things as accessible as possible. So that's why I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's better to bring these workshops and these panels and these programming to the places where they are most accessible, and kind of making culture synonymous with being accessible for everyone and not just for the people within the city centre and the Oxford University.